Okay, welcome to our Erev Shabbat Parashat. It's Parashat Mishpatim, the mitzvah that repeats itself over and over again. What am I talking about? There's actually a mitzvah, this week's Parashat, which has three separate mentionings of this mitzvah in different forms. Of all the over 50 mitzvot in Parashat Mishpatim, of all the popular mitzvot, and of some which were even doubled in this parasha, is one that was tripled. In our first parasha that introduces us to a plethora, a bombardment of many mitzvot, the one mitzvah that was addressed three different times is none other than our approach towards getting converts. When we say gerim here, we're referring to not a ger toshav, which is a goy who lives amongst Jewish city and neighborhood who accepted upon himself the 7 Noahide laws. We're referring to a ger tzedek, which is a convert who righteously converted to Judaism. So let's talk about some facts and figures regarding the Torah and gerim and converts. There are no less mentionings in our entire Torah Kedoshah of laws and directives and warnings regarding gerim than 22 mentionings. Amongst those mentionings, there are a number of Pesukim, I believe 5, which tell us about prohibitions, and we'll see and we'll read a few in our parasha shortly. Prohibitions of the way we treat, speak to, deal financially with goyim. Prohibitions regarding not taking advantage of them in a illegal setting. There are a number of directives, I'll call them, in the various mentionings in Parashiyot regarding simcha, regarding inclusion, including the gerim, the levi, in our various celebrations, in our mitzvot, in our successful settings. There are a number of times where the ger is included and maybe even categorized with aniyim, with the poor, with the widow, with the orphan. And of course, there are a number of times where the Torah makes sure to tell us that the ger is part of our nation. Torah hat, one treatment, one Torah, one law. Lachem v'lager, for you and the gerim, over and over again. We see both mitzvot and obligations and warnings and directives and advice and suggestions regarding gerim. And including that are the reasons. And really, it's pretty much boils down to a single reason that we'll address soon. So why is this? Why such the emphasis on gerim, on converts? Seemingly, they're lucky just to be around and to be included and to be allowed in without having any lineage to our nation. And yet the Torah has a heavy hand in terms of the print, of the ink spent in our Torah Shebechtav on gerim. So let's talk about, just first of all, what our parasha says about gerim. We'll talk about the mitzvot included in converts, and perhaps some biographical information regarding converts. So let us talk about our parasha. Perek Kaf Bet, Pasuk Kaf, chapter 22, verse 20. The Torah tells us, negative command, V'cher lo toneh lo tilhasenu ki gerim hayitem be'eretz Mitzrayim. This seems to have two prohibitions and one reason in this pasuk. It says lo toneh. We have a mitzvah and a prohibition regarding all of Am Yisrael. The mitzvah called ona'ah devarim, lo tonu et ishet achiv. It refers to speaking words, harsh tones, harsh terminologies, difficult mentionings of past facts that cause anguish and cause pain to someone. That's the Rashi says on the spot that first prohibition, ger lo toneh, is talking about ona'at devarim. that prohibition that we have regarding every other Jew. And then velo til hasenu, lahas means pressure. Rashi says it's speaking about gezelat mamon, or some say onaat mamon. Gezelat mamon is obviously thievery. Onaat mamon is overcharging someone, which is a whole topic in and of itself. But be that as it may, you have at least two prohibitions in this pasuk according to Rashi, and you have a reason. The reason given is you were want to call it strangers, as Rashi says, Ibn Ezra says, it's used as a generic term also for strangers. In fact, Rashi says here that anyone that was born in one nation and moved to another nation, they'll call again a stranger. So you were also strangers in the land of Egypt. You should be able to relate to this, the reason given. Later in this parasha, Perek Kaf Gimal, Pasuk Tet, chapter 23, verse 9, Torah seems to almost repeat, Vecher lo tilhas, lo tilhasenu. And Rashi says on the spot, Torah al hagen. Don't be so surprised. There are many times that the Torah has warned us about the get. In other words, Rashi is saying there's nothing new over here. It actually, we don't want to use the word repetitious regarding our Torah, but actually we are going over and reminding of the same prohibition. And the Torah gives us maybe a little more of an elaborate reason. You know the existence, you know the persona, you know the nature of the Gad because you were Gedim. And here it means, again, perhaps strangers and Eretz Mitzrayim. Okay, let's talk technical Mizvot. The Rambam counts the Mizvot of getting multiple prohibitions. The Rambam is fascinating. In this one pasuk that we read prior, Lo toneh, lo tilhasenu, the Rambam says it's talking about the regular lo toneh, the ona'at devarim, the prohibition of verbally causing someone else pain and anguish. Lo tilhasenu was referring to the monetary ona'ah, which is taking advantage of someone monetarily and overcharging, etc. But the Rambam says that every time you do this to a ger, you actually transgress on two, because you're transgressing on the regular, generic, all Israel, all Jew encompassing prohibition of ona'at devarim, of this verbal causation of pain, and you're transgressing on the specific one for the ger, for the convert. So too, regarding lo tilhasenu, regarding the monetary anguish and overcharging and taking advantage. Every time you do that to a convert, you have two transgressions, the general one for all Jews and the one specific to a ger. And that means that there are actually four transgressions in this pasuk according to the Rambam. And every time one does one of these to a ger, it's a double whammy. Now, later on in the Torah, there's also a mizvat aseh. In Parashat Akev, it says, "V'ahavtem et hager," and thou shalt love the convert. And there, the Rambam, with a little, in a more of a descriptive way, first of all, reminds us it's talking about a ger tzedek, righteous convert, and he says in just a few words why the Torah. Don't forget, we have a regular mizvah of to love every Jew. Here again, the Torah is isolating and specifying and adding a specific mizvah just for the convert. And the Rambam says it's justified. That addition is justified. You never find such a thing. You never find where the Torah says, do this or don't do this to a fellow Jew. And then, but regarding that Jew especially, don't do this and that, it's counted as a separate mizvah. You find it only with the convert. Says the Rambam, Ba'avur shenichnas b'toratenu, since he entered, in other words, voluntarily into the realm under the obligation and commitment of our Torah, hosif lo ha'el ahava. Kadosh Baruch Hu added a love obligation to this convert, v'yehed lo mizvah nosefet, and itemized, specified to him, designated for him, an extra mitzvah. What an honor. It's unreal. So those are the mitzvot specifically and technically. And as I said, besides the fact that we have two asers that become two lot asers that become four, and one mitzvah aseh, we have a plethora of mentionings. I said 22. The Torah is replete with this repetitive idea, both negative and positive, regarding the convert, regarding the get. The samachta, don't forget the get. The ani, ayatom amra, the get also, over and over and over again. Don't do that. So before I focused on, and this is really the crux of what we're trying to arrive at, the reason behind the concept embedded in this mitzvah. I want to just mention, as we said, some biographical information. How about who were some of the great Gerim of our past and our future? Well, the first famous Ger, now we know Yitro, unless it's Parashat, is sometimes mentioned, it's not explicit, to be a convert. That's a traditional idea that we have. So you may want to call him the first. But the first explicit and most famous Ger in our nation is Ruth HaMoabiyah. Ruth HaMoabiyah, we know from the book of Ruth, converted Judaism. She expressed herself in a very strong manner in the book of Ruth. She went along with Naomi. Eventually, she married Boaz, as we know. And eventually, she had a child. And that child, and she is straight from, as Boaz is straight from Yehuda, from Perez. And that child, 4 generations later, was, well, that descendant, 4 generations later, was David HaMelech. And she became the great-grandmother of our king, David HaMelech. And we know that the Davidic dynasty will make a comeback, right? Zat Hashem soon in our days. And the future Mashiach ben David is a straight, direct descendant from David HaMelech, meaning a direct descendant from Ruth HaMoabiyah, meaning that the future leader of all Am Yisrael, as David HaMelech was, and the one which we pray for, and we anticipate his arrival, is none other than a descendant of a convert, of a Ger. We know later on in history, there were some great Hachamim and great figures. Shemaya Ba'Matalon. We know there are Hachamim, they're called Zugot, pairs. And after the Great Assembly, the Anshe Knesset Gedolah was died out, so to speak. The leaders of every generation, there were 2. One was the Nasi, and one was the Av Betin. And Pirkei Avot, right in the beginning, lists us, after Shimon HaTzadik passed away, some of those great pairs in every generation. And of the last pairs of Nasi and Abedin were Shemaiah and Avtalion. Shemaiah and Avtalion were told by Hachamim were converts, and they were the teachers of none other than the great Hillel and Shammai converts. There's something to be said about the descendancy of both Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Meir. It's a discussion. Is there possible descendancy from converts? But we know, of course, Kelus Hager, we read Shanai Mikra ve'achad Targum. The Targum, the Aramaic explanation, that all the Am Yisrael is obligated to read. We must read the composition of this convert. It's from, in Tannaitic period of time, the great Kelus Hager. We have some other Tanaim mentioned in the Pirkei Avot, Ben Bagbag, Ben Hehe, Hachamim opine that they were also converts. So, and there's more, etc., and so on, and so on. Some of the greats of our history were converts. So we still need to answer the why. Why? We're a sympathetic nation, we're a kind nation. We're not a proselytizing nation. We don't at all solicit new membership. It's not our way. In fact, the process of Gerut is a discouragement. We discourage new membership. I don't think you want this, man. This is a hard deal. There's punishment, there's consequences, and there's risk involved in this venture. That's a a rough synopsis of the way we discourage Gerim who want to enter into the fold. So we don't do this. And yet, when they do enter, we embrace them incredibly. It's amazing. So here is the Torah. The Torah tells us for the first time, which is repeated a handful of times, because you were, quote unquote, Gerim. Now, it's hard to say that means converts, and the pshat is that means strangers. Right? You were in another land. You were not in control. You didn't have sovereignty, right? And eventually you were freed. So what does the Torah want from us with that key, with that reason? And why does that mean that we have to be so caring and compassionate and inclusive of these converts? So even Ezra says very simply, it just means there's one more mitzvah that helps us remember our status and our story in Egypt. Okay, that's nice. That doesn't really tell us about the essence of the convert. So the Ramban really takes this to another level and very specifically says, look at Misraim. Look at the terminology here. Get lo tilhasenu, lahas. Where does that word sound familiar to us? From the first time it's mentioned in the Torah, is Hashem telling Moshe to tell Am Yisrael, "V'gam ra'iti et halahas asher Misraim lo hasim otam." Says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, reflect back, please, at the persecution. Remember the downtrodden people that you were in Misraim. Try to reflect and ask your forefathers and read about and study the lahas, the terrible oppression that you underwent as a nation and how you suffered. And says the Ramban, and I'm going to read you a couple of words from his golden terminology, Ki ani ro'eh dim'ata ashrukim. I see the tear of the downtrodden. And I saw that with you. And I knew that you had no one to console you and no one to comfort you. And I came and I swooped down and I became the hero. I was your knight in shining armor, lahavdil, so to speak. And that's what I do to all those who are oppressed, to all those who are downtrodden, to all those who have no one else to stick up for them. I stick up for them. I'm the God of the underdog. Remember that you were Giddy and it is Messiah. Remember how I felt about you? That's the way I feel about a convert. I stick up for him. I'm there to come. I have his back because he's alone and he's oppressed and he feels a lack of strength, self-esteem, confidence, and he feels crushed and weak. And I will be there for him, so I want you, Am Yisrael, to be there for him. Takes the Or HaHayim, this idea and concept, to yet another level. And he says as follows. If you think about it for a moment, why do we tend to reject peoples, groups, individuals? We're guilty of it in Am Yisrael, unfortunately, on a daily basis. We need to quickly change this to our Mashiach, the descendant of Gerim, can come and redeem us. And that is because we are squeamish about difference. Those who differ than us in culture, in custom, in practice, make us uncomfortable. And in fact, we feel somewhat right in comparison to their wrong ways. We see another Jew. You can't be right if you're so different than me, and I know I'm right. How could this be? We see somebody else who is unlike us. He walks into our synagogue, into our party, into our neighborhood. You're not one of us. You're different than us. What are you doing here? Go back to your people. We don't actually say these things, but there's a flicker in our psyche that feels these things, that makes us think these wrongful thoughts, but it's natural. And especially when it comes to a convert, explains the Or HaHayim, the tendency is to say, one second, we have a holy descendancy. We have a lineage. Avraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov. We're holy souls. We can't be defiled, our nation. We can't be impurified with someone who, let's be honest, does not have that same soul that was addressed and embraced on Har Sinai. He's not for the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's going to dirty our people. That's the tendency. That could be at least. Says the Orach Hayim, I want you to remember something. You think you're so clean? The Tum'ah level that you were on had it, and this is also a Kabbalistic idea, that there was a mixture there with your neshama. You were on the fence. I know about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but you were on the fence there in Egypt. You had Tum'ah seeping in. We needed to filter you out there in Egypt. You weren't so clean. You didn't belong. You weren't of the pristine descendants. No. You were Be'eretz Mitzrayim. You were down and dirty. Remember that. I filtered you out. I chose you. I embraced you. I sanctified you. You know something? Same with the king. He comes into the fold of my Torah, of my nation, and he subjects himself to me. He's just as clean as you. Remember, Gerim Hiyitem Be'eretz Mitzrayim. You're no different than him. And now, he's no different than you. And so the Torah says you have every reason to embrace, exceptionally embrace, this great individual, this man and woman, who decided that he wants to join the march, the mission, the team, the membership of Am Yisrael. And as Naomi expressed to Ruth HaMoabiyah, who became Ruth the convert, I'm sorry, not as Naomi, as Boaz, the great leader of Am Yisrael, told Ruth, Yishalem Adonai Pa'olech, Uti Mazkurtech Shelema, Na'im Adonai Elohei Yisrael Asher Bat Mechasot Tahat Kenafav. Your reward should be great. Kadosh Baruch Hu should fill all your needs. And that's because you came, Mechasot Tahat Kenafav, to be under subject and be subservient under the wings of God. You took upon yourself, the subservience of a Kadosh Baruch Hu and the Torah Kedusha. That's greatness. It's voluntary. That's pure greatness. We recognize that. Yishalem Hashem and Pa'olech. Hashem should pay you for that, doubly and triply and 100-fold, because it's people like you. It's the essence of individuals that are so committed to God that is the stuff upon which this nation is based. That, says the Torah, is the get, is the convert. Amen. Amen. Shabbat shalom.